Okay, so we are on page 319, Parsha's Vaera, chapter 6, verse 2. It begins, Hashem spoke to Moshe and said to him, I am Hashem. I appeared to Avram, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov as Kel Shakai, but with my name Hashem, I did not make myself known to them. Moreover, I established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their sojourning in which they sojourned. Moreover, I have heard the groan of the children of Israel whom Egypt enslaved, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am Hashem, and I shall take you out from the burden of Egypt. I shall rescue you from their service. I shall redeem you with an outstretched arm, with the great judgments. I shall take you to me for a people. I shall be a God to you, and you shall know that I am Hashem, your God, who raised you out from under the burdens of Egypt. I'll go back, don't worry. I shall bring you to the land about which I raised my hand to give it to Avram, to Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And on page 321, and I shall give it to you as a heritage. I am Hashem. So it begins with a very cryptic few verses. Hashem said to Moshe and said to him, I am Hashem. I appeared to Avram, to Yitzchak, and Yaakov as Kel Shakai, but with my name Hashem, I did not make myself known to them. What does that mean? So Rashi explains it that the names of Hashem, each name means something different. It means a different attribute of Hashem, a different way that Hashem relates to us in this world. And he says that Kel Shakai is the name of Hashem where Hashem promises, that Hashem grants us promises. The name Hashem is that Hashem will fulfill his promises. So the statement here is that Hashem saying that I appeared to Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov as Kel Shakai, I appeared to the forefathers with lots of promises. That Hashem promised our forefathers that he would give their descendants the land of Israel, but they didn't see the fulfillment of those promises in practice. That they died. Well, the land was not theirs; it was a Canaanite land. And so Hashem saying that they did not, they saw me as Kel Shakai, they saw Hashem as the one who promised these things, whereas you're going to see it, and the Jewish people are going to see me as Hashem, as the one who fulfills it. They're going to actually see the fulfillment of the promises. The Ramban understands this a little differently. The Ramban understands it that Kel Shakai means that Hashem working in the framework of the world being ruled by nature. And that comes from an expression that Kel Shakai is Misha, or that it comes from the phrase Misha Amar La'olamo Dai, that it's Shah Dai, that said, which means that said enough. And Dai in the spirit of Vaera, we're learning this is Pesach time, that it's the same root word as Dayenu, that we sing at the Pesach Seder, Dai Dayenu, Dai Dayenu. That means it would be enough. And the name Shakai, Shed Dai, that said enough, that he limited the world, meaning that there's really no reason why there's or no reason why it has to be that the world works by the laws of physics, the natural laws that it works by, because it's all controlled by Hashem, and the laws of physics were made by Hashem. The laws of nature were made by Hashem. But Hashem chose that the world should function under these rules. That's Hashem said, Hashem put limits on the world, and those limits are the laws of nature. And that's how our forefathers related to Hashem, that with some exceptions from the Midrashim, everything that we saw in the Torah about our forefathers really followed the laws of nature. There were miracles that happened, but there were miracles within the laws of nature. They were victorious against very powerful armies. But it wasn't these. It wasn't rivers turning into blood and things that completely don't fit within the framework of nature. What happened with our forefathers, once again, leaving aside some midrashim, what happened to our forefathers fit within the framework of the laws of nature, and that's that they knew Hashem as Kel Shakai, as the one who put limits on the world, who limited it to the laws of nature. And he was saying that the Jewish people now, though, you and the Jewish people are going to see Hashem in a different role, in the role of Shmi Hashem, with the name Hashem, which is Hashem, with all his power and glory, operating above the laws of nature. And they're going to experience, experience Hashem and experience Hashem's relationship to the world, not limited by nature at all, and witness how Hashem's going to punish the Egyptians with the river turning into blood and all these supernatural events occurring, climaxing with the splitting of the sea, and the Jews walking through waters that are part in front of them, and then the waters fall on the Egyptians to punish them. Okay, and it continues. Once again, I established my covenant with them, etc. And in verse 6, it says, therefore say to the children of Israel, I am Hashem, and I shall take you out from under the burdens of Egypt. That's one expression of Hashem's redemption. And I shall rescue you from their service is another expression of I shall take you out, I shall redeem you. I'm sorry, I shall rescue you from their service. Then I shall redeem you with an outstretched arm. That's the third expression of redemption, and with great judgments. And I shall take you to me for a people and be a God to you. That's a fourth expression. These are the four expressions of redemption that we commemorate at the Pesach Seder with the 4 cups of wine. And their meanings, let's see if I've written down. If I don't know if I'm going to do it, but I could try. The meanings of these 4 expressions of redemption, the Ramban understands that I shall rescue you from their service means that I'll take you out of the land of Egypt, meaning you won't be enslaved to them anymore. You won't be in their land. And then it says, I shall redeem you. Sorry, I skipped one. I shall take you out from under the burdens of Egypt. That means the Ramban says we'll be removed from the land of Egypt, from their slavery. Then I shall rescue you from their service means that you won't even be a tribute to them. That sometimes we would leave, sometimes nations aren't actually completely controlled by another country. They're independent in a sense, but they're still dependent on them and they still have to pay tribute to them. Maybe something along the lines of like the British Commonwealth, where they still have, they're independent nations. They're not controlled by England, but somehow England, the Queen of England is still their queen. And in the old days, it used to be that countries would have to pay a tribute to other countries, and they would kind of be semi-dependent, semi-controlled by them. We won't even be in that state to Egypt. And then it continues that I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. And the Ramban says to redeem something usually implies an exchange. That if you redeem, like in the Torah, usually when we redeem something, it means that we give money in exchange for that thing or something else, but usually money in exchange for it. For example, when we redeem the firstborn, that means that if someone has a firstborn son and they're not a Levi or a Cohen, so in Savannah we don't know from such things of non-Levian, but if someone has a firstborn son, so they would give money, they would give silver coins to the Kohen and redeem them in exchange for that money. And in this case, the redeeming is that Hashem will punish them to such an extent that they'll buy their, they'll allow the Jews to go free in exchange for the plagues to stop. And that's the redeeming that's going on. It's that they're giving something to get something. They're freeing the Jewish people to get relief from the plagues. And the last expression is, and I shall take you to me for a people that will receive the Torah and become the people of Hashem. And then it concludes in verse 7, I shall take you to me, in verse 8, it says, I shall bring you to the land about which I raised my hand to give it to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's not necessarily an expression of our redemption from Egypt, but according to some, that expression is symbolized by the cup of Eliyahu, the cup of Elijah that we put out on the table but don't drink, and that will be finalized with the coming of Eliyahu announcing our redemption, or announcing our Redeemer with the coming of Mashiach. And so on page 321, so this is what Moshe was told to tell the Jewish people. And on verse 9, so Moshe spoke accordingly to the children of Israel, but they did not heed Moshe because of shortness of breath and hard work. So they were so exhausted and I don't want to say unmotivated, but they didn't have the energy or really the spirit to listen to Moshe because of the hard work. And in verse 10, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, come speak to Paro, king of Egypt, that he send the children of Israel from his land. And in verse 12, Moshe spoke before Hashem saying, behold, the children of Israel have not listened to me. So how will Paro listen to me? And I have sealed lips. The Beis Yitzchak understands this idea of sealed lips is that he is saying he has a speech impediment. And if you look back where they kind of had this conversation before, by when Hashem first commanded Moshe to speak to the to be the one to free the Jewish people. In verse, this is back in Shemos on page 309. it says, verse 10, so page 309, verse 10, it says, Moshe replied to Hashem when Hashem charged him to speak to Paro. He says, please, my Lord, I am not a man of words, not since yesterday, nor since the day before yesterday, nor since you first spoke to your servant, for I am heavy of mouth and heavy of speech. Then he used two expressions. It's literally heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. And the Beis Yitzchak understands that he was saying two different things. He had two problems. That first of all, like we said, it said here that he's heavy of mouth, is that he had a speech impediment. He was stuttered, or whatever the speech impediment was. It made it difficult for him to understand the words that he's saying. But the Beis Yitzchak says that there are two different reasons why someone could be hard to understand. First of all, like we said here, that a person could have a speech impediment, so it's hard to make out the words that they're saying. And there are some people who could say words clearly and beautifully in a way that you could hear very sharply every single word that they're saying. But there's some people who just don't know how to speak eloquently, and they don't have a very organized mind in a way that they can convey thoughts in a way that's understandable to people. There's some people who every single word they say is very clear, but it's just not organized in a way that's understandable, and it just sounds like a word soup. It's just like you hear lots of words that are disconnected and don't convey ideas clearly. And Moshe actually had both problems, and that's what he was saying before in Shemos. He said that I'm heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. Heavy of mouth means that he can't speak words, that he has a speech impediment, and heavy of tongue means that he can't speak eloquently, he can't communicate ideas. And here he didn't mention that part about not being able to communicate ideas because Hashem said Hashem gave him the words that he was going to say. So he didn't have to communicate ideas because he was basically just saying over words that were dictated to him by Hashem. But he said that I have another issue, that I have a speech impediment, and therefore he had Aaron help him out. So Hashem told him that Aaron will interpret the words that you say, and Aaron can speak clearly. Okay, then it goes through in verse 14. It goes through, these were the heads of their fathers' households, and it begins giving the yichus, the lineage of the leaders of the Jewish people. So it begins with the heads of the sons of Reuben. And it talks about the families of Reuben. Then in verse 15, the sons of Shimon. Then in verse 16, these were the sons of Levi. And in verse 17, the sons of Gershon, the sons of Kahas. In verse 18, the sons of Kahas, Amram, Yitzchar, Hebron, and Uziel. And then verse 19, the sons of Merari. And verse 20, Amram took his aunt Yocheved as a wife, and she bore him Aaron and Moshe. And then it goes through the years of Amram's life, the sons of Yitzhar, the sons of Uziel. Aaron took Elisheva, in verse 23, Aaron took Elisheva, daughter of Aminadav, sister of Nachshon, as a wife, and she bore him Nadav and Avihu, Elazar and Isamar. So Aaron's wife was Elisheva once again, and she was the daughter of Aminadav, the sister of Nachshon, who was a very important person in the story of our time in the desert. And in verse 24, the sons of Korach were Asir, Elkanah, and Aviasaph. And in verse 25, Elazar, son of Aaron, took for himself from the daughters of Putiel as a wife. And our sages say that Putiel was Yisro. And so he married the daughter of Yisro, and she bore Pinchas. These were the leaders of the fathers of the Levites according to their families. And this was, and it continues in verse 26, this was the Aaron and Moshe, this Aaron and Moshe that we mentioned in this lineage. This was the Aaron and Moshe to whom Hashem said, take the children of Israel out of Egypt according to their legions. And they were the ones who spoke to Paro, king of Egypt, to take the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. This was the Moshe and Aaron that we mentioned. And remember before, we never really gave who their lineage. That before, when we mentioned Moshe's birth, it just said a man of Levi came and and married a daughter of Levi. And so it's not clear who exactly Moshe was. Now it's giving his whole lineage. And the Ramban says the reason why we do this here, and we start from Reuven, we do Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and then stop. We don't go through the rest of the tribes. Is to, he says, the reason why is that we're trying to show that Moshe and Aaron were really the appropriate people to lead the Jewish people. That it was saying that the Torah is trying to say that Hashem looked through all of starting from the oldest, Hashem looked through the descendants of Reuven, and there was nobody who was who was Roy, who was appropriate to be the leader. And then he went through the descendants of Shimon. Finally, once he got to Levi, these were the people who should lead the Jewish people, and went through the families of Levi until Kahaz, until Amram, and until Moshe and Aaron. And these are, and finally, it's like we found, these are the people who should be doing it. And once we found them, so there was no need to look further. Okay, so now in chapter 7 on page 323, Hashem said to Moshe, "See, I have made you a master over Paro, and Aaron your brother shall be your spokesman. You shall speak everything that I shall command you, and Aaron your brother command you. And Aaron your brother shall speak to Paro that he should send the children of Israel from his land." On page 325, "But I shall harden Paro's heart, and I shall multiply my signs and my wonders from in the land of Egypt. Paro will not heed you, and I shall put my hand upon Egypt, and I shall take out my legions, my people, the children of Israel, from the land of Egypt with great judgment." And verse 5, "And Egypt shall know that I am Hashem when I stretch out my hand over Egypt, and I shall take the children of Israel out from among them." And it concludes here that Moshe and Aaron did as Hashem commanded them, so they did. Moshe was 80 years old, and Aaron was 83 years old when they spoke to Paro. So the commentaries comment on this, that it says in verse 3, "But I shall harden Paro's heart, and Paro won't listen to you." They ask that, what happened to free choice? That we know that we're put in this world with a purpose, and that purpose is to overcome obstacles, and that's what free choice allows us. Free choice allows us to overcome the obstacles and thereby earn a reward. And it's not just Jews; all of humanity is given free choice. And if they're given free choices for a reason, so how is it that Hashem is hardening Paro's heart? It sounds like that Hashem's taking away his free choice. And to that, the Ramban gives two answers. He says he has two answers, and both of them are true. Says that first of all, Paro was going through the makas. Paro was going through the plagues, which made it very difficult for him to stay the course. Meaning, free choice implies that we have the ability to choose one way or the other. Whereas with the plagues, that really made it impossible for him to choose, because a human being could only put up with so much, and people are tortured to a point, and past that point, they don't have free choice. And they make decisions not because of their decision, but to stop the pain, and that is not free choice. So the hardening of Paro's heart is what allowed him to withstand the plagues and thereby choose to not send them out, because if he would have sent them out without any hardening of his heart, that wouldn't be his choice. That wouldn't be that he's choosing because it's the right thing to do to send it out. He's choosing to make this pain stop, make the difficulty stop. So Hashem hardened his heart to balance the scales and allow him to withstand that pain to not send them out. That's one answer the Ramban gives. And another answer he gives is that if you look carefully, you see that it doesn't say that Hashem hardened Paro's heart until well into the plagues. That it says that Paro hardened his own heart, or Paro's heart was hardened. But only late in the plagues does it say that Hashem hardened Paro's heart. And so the Ramban says that that's because Paro did have the chance to choose, and he had freedom of choice, but freedom of choice only goes so far. And if a person falls, there's a certain point a person could reach where the decree is made, the decree is sealed, and there's nothing more they could do. And that's the point. Just like we understand that a person lives only so long, and once they die, our choices only last while we're alive. Once a person dies, their choice is gone, and they don't have that opportunity to make moral choices anymore. That can happen when a person is alive as well. And with Paro, he had choices. He had the choice, and he failed and failed and failed again until it came to the point that the time of choosing was gone. He already chose enough, and at that point, Hashem hardened his heart to till the end of the plagues. Okay, so then it continues on page 325, verse 8. Hashem said to Moshe and Aaron, saying, when Paro speaks to you, saying, provide a wonder for yourself, you shall say to Aaron, take your staff and cast it down before Paro. It will become a snake. And that's what they did. And in verse 11, Paro too summoned his wise men and sorcerers, and they too, the necromancers of Egypt, the magicians of Egypt, did so with their incantations. Each one cast down his staff, and they became snakes. And the staff of Aaron swallowed their staffs. And the heart of Paro was strong, and he did not heed them as Hashem was spoken. And this is one instance, like the Ramban said, where it says that, not that it doesn't say that Hashem hardened Paro's heart. It says Paro's heart was strong. He hardened his own heart and didn't listen to Hashem. And the Medrash says about this that it says that the magicians of Paro were able to do this. And the Medrash says that Paro laughed at Moshe and said, like, that you're a straw seller and you're bringing straw to the straw market, meaning that you're bringing straw to a place that has a lot of straw, that you're performing a magic trick by turning your stick into your staff into a snake. And he says that you're coming to Egypt where anybody can do that. You're going to a place where we're expert magicians, so it makes no sense what you're doing. And Moshe said just the opposite. He's saying, you'll see that what I have is above and beyond. What I'm doing is above and beyond anything that your magicians could do. And when someone has something that's very precious, they don't sell it in a place where it's not found. They sell it in the place that has the most, because that's where the biggest experts are going to be. And that was the statement that Moshe, that Hashem was making, is that if Hashem would do this in a place without magicians, without people who are able to replicate what was actually magic, so then people would just think it's magic. So he went to the place that had the magicians, and they were not able to really replicate what Moshe was doing to prove that this wasn't magic. This is the hand of Hashem. This is the hand of God. And the example, the mashal that Moshe gives is, let's say you have a diamond. If you have a really, really, really good diamond, you don't sell it at some caves on the corner. If you have a really, really precious diamond, you take it to the diamond district. You take it to the place that they know diamonds, that they really know diamonds, and they'll really recognize its worth. But if you take it to a place that aren't experts in diamonds, they won't recognize its worth. So that's why he did this in Egypt. And in verse 14, it states, and this is on page 327, Hashem said to Moshe, Paro's heart is stubborn, he refuses to send the people. Go to Paro in the morning, behold, he goes out to the water, and you shall take a stand opposite him at the river's bank, and the staff that was turned into a snake you shall take in your hand. You shall say to him, Hashem, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you, saying, send out my people that they may serve me in the wilderness. But behold, you have not heeded up to now. And in verse 17 on page 327, so says Hashem, through this you shall know that I am Hashem. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I shall strike the waters that are in the river, they shall change the blood. The fish life that is the water shall die, and the river shall become foul. Egypt will grow weary of trying to drink water from the river, etc. That he said that I'm going to turn the river into blood. This is introduced, though, by go to Paro in the morning, behold, he goes out to the water. What's the meaning of that? Rashi brings a medrash, I think it's Rashi, brings a medrash that Paro claimed to be a god. He claimed to be a deity. And as a deity, it wouldn't really make sense that he would need to go to the bathroom, because that was assumed that's not something that gods would do. So what Paro would do, he would go to the bathroom by the river very early in the morning when nobody was around and not go the entire day. And through this, he would prove that he was a god. And so Hashem told Moshe to go out to the river as Paro is going to the bathroom and making a statement, I know who you are. And the Kli Yakar seems to go with this. The Malbim takes a different tact, which I'll get into. But according to the commentaries, and the Malbim says this, the Kli Yakar says this, he brings it from the Abarbanel and expounds on it, is that there's a key verse here. In it's verse 17 that says, so says Hashem, through this you shall know that I am Hashem. And the Abarbanel says that this is one of the key verses in the Parsha saying the purpose of the plagues. And he says that there are really three verses that convey this. There's this one, that's on page 327, verse 17. Through this you shall know I am Hashem. And on page, I'll start from page 331 at the bottom, and verse 16. You'll see there's a very similar sequence of verses. The bottom of page 331, verse 16, by the fourth plague, the swarm of wild beasts, it says, Hashem said to Moshe, arise early in the morning and station yourself before Paro. Behold, he goes out to the water, and you shall say to him, so said Hashem, send out, and on page 333, send out my people that they may serve you, that they may serve me. For if you do not send out my people, behold, I shall incite against you, your servants, your people, and your houses, the swarm of wild beasts, and the house of Egypt shall be filled with the swarm, even the ground upon which they are. And on that day I shall set apart the land of Goshen upon which my people stands, that there shall be no distinction between my people, there shall be a distinction between my people and your people. Tomorrow the sign will come about. So here in verse 18, it says, once again, so that you will know that I am Hashem in the midst of the land. So whereas by the plague of blood, it says, so you may know that I am Hashem. By the plague of the swarm of wild animals, it says, so you may know that I am Hashem in the midst of the land. And if you skip to the plague of hail, which is the last plague in this week's Parsha, this is on page 337. It says, so says Hashem, the God of the Hebrews at the top, send out my people that they may serve me. For this time I shall send all my plagues against your heart and upon your servants and your people, so that you shall know that there is none like me in all the world. So the Barbanel points out that there are 3 times in this Parsha that he says the reason for the plagues. One is by the plague of blood, one is by the plague of the wild animals, one is by the plague of the hail. And the first one, by the plague of blood, it says, so you may know that I am Hashem, I am God. By the plague of by the wild animals, so you may know that I am Hashem, adding in the midst of the land, and by the plague of hail, so you may know that there is none other than me. So you may know that there's none like me in the world. And the Malbim and the Klayaka expound on this very at length, and they say that we say in the Haggadah that when we describe the plagues, we say that one of the sages gave a sign in an acrostic for the plagues, and it's Ditzach, Adash, Ba'achav, that they group the plagues in a group of 3, another group of 3, and a group of 4. And the Malbim says the last group is really a group of 3, because the death of the firstborn doesn't really count, because the point of that was to get Paro to let the Jews go free, whereas the first 9 were to punish the Egyptians. So he says there are really 3 groups of 3, and each of these verses where it gives the reason for the plagues are in the first of a group of 3, are in the beginning of each group of 3, and that's because each group of 3 had a different purpose. The first group of 3, that's the plague of blood, the plague of frogs, and the plague of lice, were to show Paro, I am Hashem, I am God. The second group of 3 was the wild animals, the plague, the death of the domesticated animals, and boils were to make a statement that I am Hashem in the midst of the land. And the last one, the plagues of hail, which is the last one in this Parsha, and it continues to next Parsha, of the locusts and the darkness. Drive that backwards, I think I got it. As to say,
none like me in the world.
What's that?
There is none like me in the world.
Yes, thank you. There's none like me in the world. So that's the purpose of the last 3 of the plagues, until the last one of the death of the firstborn. And the Malbim points out that even within each group of 3, there's a pattern, that the first one is always to meet Paro by the river. The second one is always in a public place in the palace, like in front of all the people. And the third one always comes without a warning. That the third one, whereas the first 2 always have an introduction, always have a warning before it, tell Paro that this is going to happen. The third one does not. And the Malbim says the third one is always a punishment for not listening to the first 2. And he says the first one, the Malbim says that, I mentioned Rashi, the Medrash, that the first one was to meet Paro by the river to show that you see him going to the bathroom, that he's not a god. The Malbim says similar, but that the Egyptians worshiped the Nile. And Paro considered himself a god. And we'll see that in the Haftarah, is that the Haftarah prophesizes, this is from Yechezkel, the prophet Ezekiel, says about Paro, that Paro is like a serpent in the Nile, saying, I am the Nile and I created myself. That Paro proclaimed himself as a god, and they worshiped Paro and they worshiped the Nile. So he was told to meet Paro by the Nile, where Paro was going to actually worship by the Nile. And at that point, to make this miracle to show that the Nile has no power. So the first 3 I mentioned, that the first 3 are the plague of blood, the plague of frogs, and the plague of lice, which show that I am Hashem. And that is in each case were things that the Egyptians worshipped, that the first two were, especially the blood and the frogs, were directly on the Nile, that the blood was the Nile itself was struck in a sense, that the Nile turned to blood. It was a punishment of the Nile, which was what the Egyptians worshipped. And the second plague was actually trouble coming to the Egyptians from the Nile, that the Nile, which is what gave them their sustenance, it's what watered all their crops, and what they, once again, what they worshipped and depended on, that's where their troubles came from. So, and that was another proof, I am Hashem. And the third one, like I mentioned, was a punishment, and that was the plague of lice. Then came the second set of three, was the to show that I am Hashem in the midst of the land, meaning that Paro could say, and maybe Paro did say, that even if Hashem is God, but why would God be invested in what happens in this world? And this is something that the Greek philosophers went into, that they believed that the gods created the world, and they were okay with that, but the idea that an entity that could create the universe, that they would be interested in the deeds of individual people, that made no sense to them. How could something so great be interested in what any given person would do? And that's the statement that Hashem was making, so that you'll know that I am Hashem in the midst of the land, because I'm in the midst of the land, that Hashem is controlling what happens here and is interested and invested and active in what's happening here. And that the first of the second set were the wild animals, that the wild animals, it's very clear if you look at the verses. Let's go there on page 333, verse 17. For if you do not send out my people, behold, I shall incite against you, your servants, your people, and your houses, the swarm of wild beasts. And once again, page 333. And the houses of Egypt shall be filled with the swarm, and even the ground upon which they are. And on that day I shall set apart the land of Goshen upon which my people stand, that there shall be no swarm there, so that you will know that I am Hashem in the midst of the land. I shall make a distinction between my people and your people. Tomorrow the sign will come about. That what's the proof that I am Hashem in the midst of the land, that Hashem is interested in what happens in this world and interested in what people do and individual people, is that these wild animals only went into the Egyptian places and not into the Jewish areas. And that was the distinction Hashem made between the Egyptians and the Jews, which proved that it's not just Hashem sending a plague and whatever happens, happens. Hashem's interested and active in separating. This is where the plague will be. It'll affect these people, not those people. And that was true in the next one also, in the epidemic where the animals died. There also it says on page 335, verse 4, Hashem shall distinguish between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, and not a thing that belongs to the children of Israel will die. So in that case also the emphasis is on the separation between the Jews and the Egyptians, is that the Egyptian animals will die, the animals of the Jews will not die. And it's about I am Hashem in the midst of the land. And when it came to the plague of hail, where once again in verse 13, it says on the bottom of page 335, Hashem spoke to Moshe, arise early in the morning and station yourself before Pharaoh and say to him, so says Hashem, the God of the Hebrews, send out my people that they may serve me, on the top of page 337, verse 14. For this time, and once again, like it says there, arise early in the morning and station yourself before Pharaoh. This is again at the river. For this time I shall send all my plagues against your heart and upon your servant and your people, so that they shall know that there is none like me in the world. Thank you, Sid. And in verse 15, for now I could have sent my hand and stricken you and your people with the pestilence, and you would have been obliterated from the earth. However, for this I let you endure, in order to show you my strength, so that my name will be declared in the world. And there will be this heavy hail. And where am I? And in verse 23, it says, Moshe stretched out his staff towards heaven, and Hashem sent thunder and hail, and fire went earthward, and Hashem rained hail upon the land of Egypt. There was hail and fire flaming amid the hail, very heavy, such as never been in the entire land of Egypt from the time it became a nation. Okay, and here the Medrash says that this hail was ice and fire together. That it says that there was hail and there was fire. That the Medrash says, I say to say, that there inside the hail there was fire. It was like a firebomb inside the ice. And those are two opposites that usually wouldn't mix, that ice is made out of water and fire is fire, and usually the two don't go together. But, and this was a proof to Paro that, that I'm Hashem, there's none like me in the world, meaning that Paro, this is another thing that the Egyptians were okay with, that the Egyptians were polytheistic, that they believed in lots of gods. They had a whole pantheon, a whole group of them. So he didn't believe in God, in our God to begin with, but once, if you prove that he existed, he'd be like, okay, there's another one, that's fine with him. So here there's a statement that I am Hashem in the midst of the land, that Hashem is in charge of everything and there's none like him. There's nothing equal to Hashem. There are no peers. And that was proven by Hashem controlling two opposites, whereas in the Egyptian frame of the way they would think with a polytheistic view is that every power has its own guy in charge, that there's like the god of thunder and the god of lightning and the god of a god of water. But for one god to control both, that wouldn't work in their thought system. And here was a statement, I am God, there's none other like me. There's no other power. Oh, Hashem's in charge, in control of everything. And the Klei Yakar interprets this a little differently, that he understands that all three of the last ones involved darkness. Says that it says that there was a storm with thunder and hail and fire, and there were great clouds, and the sun was blocked away. And also by the next two, which are in the next week's parsha, are the locusts, which it said there was a great cloud of locusts that covered the sun, that the sun was invisible through the great cloud of locusts. And following that was a plague of darkness, where obviously the sun wasn't seen, and that was one of the deities of Egypt, was Ra, the sun god. And this is a show that there's no peer to Hashem, there's none equal to Hashem, that the great sun god of the Egyptians was completely covered and by Hashem. Okay, and just going through I just wanted to go through the 10 plagues and say something about them. I think this is from the Klei Yakar that he says what the plagues were about. So the first plague was the plague of blood. And like I mentioned, that the Egyptians worshipped the Nile, and Paro said that he was the great sea serpent of the Nile, and he created himself. So here the Nile was struck, and also the Egyptians threw the Jewish boys into the Nile. So so this was a punishment for that. The frogs. Paro, when Moshe said that he was sent by Hashem, Paro said, I don't know Hashem. I don't know that God. So he was punished for that by showing that even frogs know Hashem. Even frogs recognize the authority of Hashem. And these frogs, it says in, I'll go back to read it. Frogs was one of the ones I skipped. But in, where am I? In verse 26, it says that, verse 27, it says, but if you refuse to send out, behold, I shall strike your entire boundary with frogs. This is on page 329, verse 27. Verse 28, the rivers shall swarm with frogs. They shall ascend and come into your palace, into your bedrooms, and in your bed, and in the house of your servants and of your people, and into your ovens and into your kneading bowls. That the frogs went everywhere, even like into their kneading bowls and into their ovens. And frog won't usually jump into an oven. Well, hot there, it'll kill it. But these frogs jumped there because the command of Hashem was to go everywhere in Egypt, and the frogs went everywhere in Egypt. And this was a statement that if frogs would do that, even the more so, Paro should be listening to Hashem. The next of the plagues was kingdom of lice, that the Egyptians forced the Jews to work very hard and cover themselves with sweat, and which would cause, they were very dirty and sweaty, and that caused lice to come to them. So the Egyptians were punished then. Then there were wild animals, because they caused the Jews to be compared to wild animals, and this was with the midwives, when that Paro told the midwives to kill the Jewish boys as they were being born. And the midwives answered Paro that they tried, but they couldn't, because the Jews are like wild animals, that they're able to give birth themselves without any help. No wild animal calls a midwife for help, but somehow they give birth. and the Jews managed to give birth without the midwives coming. So the next plague is the death of the plague and the death of the animals, and this is because when the tribes came, when Yaakov and his sons came down to Egypt, they told Paro that they were shepherds, and they raised animals. And because they were forced to be enslaved to Paro and work for Paro, so they weren't able to take care of their animals anymore, and Paro took away their business. So the Egyptians were punished that their animals died. Then Paro was punished then the Egyptians were punished with boils, the plague of Shechina, boils, because the Egyptians separated the families. That there's an earlier example of family separation where they interrupted the family life and separated husbands from their wives. So the Egyptians were punished with a difficult skin conditions that made it very difficult for husbands and wives to be intimate. And the last one, once again, was the hail that Paro said, "Who is Hashem that I should listen to his voice?" And the Klei Yakar said, so therefore he was punished with hail, this great roaring noise of a plague in punishment. Okay, and the Haftarah is on page 1149. Page 1149, it's the Navi Yechezkel, the prophet Ezekiel, and it says on chapter 29, it says, in the 10th year, in the 10th month, on the 12th of the month, the word of Hashem came to me saying, Son of man, which is how Yechezkel is referred to in the non-prophets, set your face against Paro, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against Egypt. Speak and you shall say, thus says my Lord Hashem, behold, I am against you, Paro, king of Egypt, the great sea monster that crouches within its rivers, who has said, mine is the river and I have made myself. Now I shall attach hooks to your cheeks, and I shall cause the fish of your rivers to cleave to your scales, and I shall draw you out from within your rivers, and the fish of your rivers shall cleave to your scales. I shall cast you in the wilderness, you and all the fish of your rivers, upon the face of the field shall you fall, not brought in and not gathered together, to the beasts, to the land, and to the birds of the heavens have I given you as food. And then those who dwell in Egypt shall know I am Hashem, because they were a reed-like support for the house of Israel. And the reeds are not a very good support, meaning that they were like you feel like you could lean on it and then it just bends and collapses. And when we went to Egypt, that Egypt was our friend, and Egypt was our friend, and they took us in, and then they ended up enslaving us. And this was a message also for the future, a later day Egypt, where the Israelite kingdom relied on Egypt, and they were not a good ally. And once again, and this verse really illustrates, that verse of the great of Paro really illustrates who Paro was, that he was the great sea monster that crouches within the Nile, saying, I am the Nile, and mine is the river, and I have made myself. That they worshiped the Nile, and Paro claimed that he was a part of it, that he was part of that deity, and that he created himself rather than being a creation of God. Okay, Shkayach, have a great